Hi. So today's video is going to be all about the nitrogen cycle. And so nitrogen is an element that we find in the periodic table, and it is very important for living organisms. It is found in some of the major biomolecules, such as proteins. If you remember, proteins are made of amino acids, and each amino acid has an amino group, and the amino group is NH2. And so we need nitrogen for all the amino acids in our proteins. Another very important molecule for life is DNA. And so each nucleotide in a DNA has a nitrogenous base, and there's nitrogen in those bases. And so in that way, nitrogen is essential for life. And so we need to make sure we have nitrogen in our food so that we can do our cellular processes. So the title of today's lecture is called the nitrogen cycle. And nitrogen is an essential element for life because we need it for major biomolecules such as proteins and nucleic acids, such as DNA and RNA. Okay, and so before I get into the nitrogen cycle itself, I just want to point out the different spheres that we have on the planet. And so these are places where nitrogen can be held, and nitrogen, like all matter, cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. And so nitrogen, like all matter, is just being recycled over and over and over. And nitrogen moves through the different spheres on our planet. And these are the four spheres that this class is going to focus on. So the first one is the ground. Oops. And so the ground is what we call the lithosphere. So I'm going to put like a mountain. See, there's like a big mountain here. Okay, and then it's going to have a drop off. And so this is called the lithosphere. And then another sphere that we have is the water, and this is called the hydrosphere. So this is like our oceans and our rivers and our lakes. And also this includes our ice caps, the hydrosphere. And then all the air on the planet is called our atmosphere. And then the last sphere is called the biosphere. And the biosphere includes all living organisms. Okay, and so for that, I'm going to draw a plant and an animal. So we have a tree for the plant. Okay, there's our tree. And then we need a trunk. Okay, there's a trunk. And then I'm going to draw an animal. And so maybe I could draw like a deer. I'm not very good at drawing deer, so. Okay, so there's a little deer. And so the biosphere includes plants and animals, and it includes like fungus and bacteria also. So anything that is alive. Okay, so for the nitrogen is usually found in its most stable form as N2. So I'm going to write that. Nitrogen is found as N2, and the 2 is usually a subscript. So it's like a little 2 on the bottom. I can't really write that on this whiteboard, so I'm just putting like a big 2, but normally it's a little 2. And what that means is that nitrogen always binds to each other. And so nitrogen, let me see here. So if we pull in the periodic table, let's look at nitrogen. Okay, so here's our periodic table. Let me scoot this down a little bit. We find it right here. It is element number 7 in the periodic table. Okay, let me make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. It's number 7 right here. Okay, and so if we were to draw a Bohr model of nitrogen, this is what it would look like. So it would have 7 atoms, it would have 7 protons in the nucleus and 7 neutrons in the nucleus, okay? And then it would have one orbital containing 2 electrons. Okay, I'm going to scoot this up. I'm going to draw my orbitals like this. So here's one orbital that's going to have 2 electrons, and then we're going to have another orbital that's going to have 5 electrons. And then I'm going to draw a second nitrogen. Okay, so here is 7 protons and 7 neutrons. I'm going to draw the electrons in a second. And then we've got one orbital and then a second orbital. Okay, let me make this one a little bit bigger. I guess I can't. Okay, and then so I'm going to draw the electrons now. And so the first orbital is going to have 1, 2 electrons, and then it's going to have 3, oops. Oh my goodness. Let's see here. Okay, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, this nitrogen is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and so for an atom to be stable, it has to have a complete outer shell. And so for this nitrogen to have a complete outer shell, it needs 3 more electrons. And this one needs 3 more electrons. So what ends up happening is they share these electrons. This is a covalent bond. And so there's 3 covalent bonds between the nitrogens. So what you have is a nitrogen with a triple bond to another nitrogen. And this triple bond is crazy strong. It is very difficult to break a triple covalent bond. So nitrogen is floating around in the atmosphere as N2, okay? So let me draw that in here. So in the atmosphere, we've got N2 floating around. So it's like this, N with a subscript 2. And so our atmosphere is actually almost 80% nitrogen. So it is the most abundant element in our atmosphere. A lot of people think that our atmosphere is mostly oxygen, but it's not. It's nitrogen. So I'm going to write that down. Our atmosphere is, I'm going to say 78% nitrogen. And it is in the atmosphere as a super stable triple bond. And so it is very difficult to break. And so it is in the atmosphere as an N2, which makes it impossible for us to use it for the molecules that we need it for. So we need it for protein and for DNA. But in this N2 form, we can't use it. So it is in the air and we can't even use it. So what we have to do is there needs to be some processes that are going to break that triple bond. And there are only 3 processes in the world that is capable of breaking that triple bond. And these are the 3 processes. Okay, so our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. And there are 3 processes, only 3 processes that can break the triple bond between the nitrogens. Okay, and these are the processes. The first one is called denitrifying bacteria. Denitrifying bacteria. Okay, and these are very specialized bacteria. Only a very few species can do this, like 3. 3 species out of millions of different species of bacteria are able to take nitrogen out of the atmosphere, break that triple bond apart, so now we can use the nitrogen. And these denitrifying bacteria, they live in the soil. Okay, so these bacteria live in the soil, and they live in the roots of legume plants. Okay, so first of all, a legume is a plant that makes like a little vegetable in a pod. So a legume is a veggie in a pod. For example, a pea, like pea in a pod, or a peanut, okay, or lentil. So these are your legumes, and they're very, very nutritious. You should eat your lentils. I mean, you should eat your legumes as much as you can because they're very nutritious. However, these legume plants, they have these special roots that make these little holes that are called nodules. And these little nodules are little homes for the bacteria. Okay, so legume is a plant in a pod, is a veggie in a pod, and the roots have little homes for the bacteria. Okay, the roots have little homes. They're like little hobbit holes, homes for the bacteria to live in. Okay, and so it's just this weird thing where legumes have these special roots that have these little hobbit holes that these bacteria can live in. And these legume plants harbor these bacteria that can break down the nitrogen, which is perfect because plants are the base of our food chain. And the plants are going to take up the nitrogen in their roots and they incorporate it into biomolecules. And then when we eat the plants, we now have access to that nitrogen. And then animals will eat those animals, will eat those animals, will eat those plants. So as long as the nitrogen gets into the plants, it's at the base of our food chain, we are fine. And that's what does it, are these weird, cool bacteria. They break down the nitrogen, put it in the roots of these plants, and now the plant has the nitrogen to make all the molecules. Okay, the second way that the nitrogen can get broken down is lightning. So lightning has enough energy to break the triple bond. So whenever lightning is occurring outside, these nitrogen molecules that are in our atmosphere are being broken apart. And then the nitrogen falls into the soil. And then all the plants now have access to nitrogen and incorporate that into their bodies as those biomolecules, those proteins, and those DNAs. And then when we eat the plant, we now have access to the nitrogen also. Okay, and the last process that breaks down nitrogen is a man-made process, and this is called the Haber process. This is man-made. This was invented by a man named Haber. He was a German. This happened in World War I. And he figured out this way that if you use a lot of pressure and heat in a machine, you could break apart the nitrogen. And so because of this, we are now able to make, nitrogen in a way that plants can use it. And so you can go to the hardware store like Ace Hardware or Lowe's and pick up a bag of fertilizer. And in that fertilizer is nitrogen made through the Haber process. And you can now fertilize your plants with all this nitrogen without having to count on the bacteria or lightning to get the nitrogen to the plant. Okay, so it's man-made and it uses heat and pressure to break the triple bond. And it is this process that we make all the plant fertilizer. Okay, and so this is awesome, except for the fact that we're making too much fertilizer. Okay, and we put too much fertilizer on the land, and then the nitrogen doesn't all get used up. And then we have this excess in nitrogen, which causes some problems in some of the ecosystems, which is another way that humans can impact the environment. But that's for a different video. Okay, guys, that's all I have for you today. See you guys next time.